All right, we're live. Hello,
Yeah,
everyone. I'm here again with Ben and Jax. Thank you very much for joining me.
anytime.
I want to start off by saying the title is um,
Accurate.
accurate. Yeah. Oh, wait, do I have the? Oh, look at that! I have the YouTube up in the background. I'm sitting here thinking I'm getting an echo, and it's like, nope, you just are an idiot. So, yeah, the title's a little tongue in cheek, right? Jax, I think, is going to lean heavy into heavy into it being accurate. Um, I am. It's definitely a tongue in cheek, but I'm only going to say that once up front. So if you end up attending later and you don't see me say that it was tongue in cheek, feel free to shout at me or us. Um, but yeah, I kind of want to, and we touched on this the last time the three of us were together. Um, like, what is a role playing game? What is role playing? And I wanted, Jax, I've asked you sort of conversationally off camera.
Hmm.
And Ben, I don't think I've asked you, but I do think that I had mentioned it that I would like to get a definition. I don't know if you have anything prepared. If you don't, no huge deal. It's
Here's my diagram.
I
I
think
was, yeah.
go ahead, Jax.
I was legit gonna do a diagram, and I ran out of time.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Well, that would have been a heavy lean toward.
Magic.
it would have been heavy.
Yes,
Yeah.
in the circle, role playing.
Hang
Outside
out the circle,
not role playing.
Not role play.
We are all in the circle.
Yes. So I've been kicking around a definition for a little bit, specifically of role playing, not of role playing game. I think that it's worth differentiating, and the reason is because, and I've said this a couple times, but even backstage, I just said that I think it's worth differentiating because engaging in role playing doesn't necessarily mean you're engaged in a role playing game. And so there's a difference there. So you have to qualify role playing game along with role playing. So, like, I have an operational definition of role play. I only just, and I mean just, began to sort of hammer out the details regarding what a role playing game is. Both of them require work, right? Because I want to be specific, because it needs to be well defined as its own thing, right? So in that effort, it's going to be exclusionary of other types of activities, but it needs to be inclusive with regard to, common parlance, the way that people use the term role playing game, what they mean when they say role playing game. And there's such a high degree of granularity because the more specific you get, the more kind of specific you have to be in turn with each term you include in the definition. We'll get there. We'll get there.
Yeah.
So which one of you wants to start?
Well, I'll go because mine's really broad,
Okay, cool.
right? And I guess sorry, we can start broad and then see what I don't know. Maybe it will narrow or not. And I think before we get into role playing games, you just got to start with role play.
Yes, I agree with that.
Right. And role playing, I'm trying to think back to exactly what I said, but I think essentially I see it as seeking to sort of inhabit and reflect the mindset, shall we say, and actions of a being other than yourself as your lived self. Right? So it can be a version of yourself, it can be a character, it can be a creature. But it's, that's kind of my really broad definition to which it would encompass role-playing games, acting, role-play therapy, work training, really, really broad. That, to me, is role-playing, just inhabiting the mindset and reflecting the actions of someone other than yourself.
I like that. I definitely have that included in my own definition. But Ben, why don't you go ahead, and then because I guess the kind of the way I want to structure this is like, let's everyone say what they mean, and then we'll see where overlap is, and we'll see where overlap isn't, and then we can sort of
Discuss
discuss
the outliers.
those
Yeah.
elements. Yeah.
So I think, and I'm much in agreement with what Jax is saying. And role playing is when you're. I think ultimately role playing is when you're attempting to be something you're not, because you're playing a role, right? And you acting is role playing. I mean, some actors method act, right? And
Mhm.
they like really role play to get into character. The military does training exercises. That's role play. And it's taken out of that. I mean, that's war games, but it's not, you know, a game, right? Well, I mean,
Right.
it's got a win condition, so yes, it is a game,
Yes.
but that's not how, like, when you say role playing games, you think D&D. You don't think, Op 4 versus Blue 4 with paintball guns.
Right. Right.
So I think role playing is when you're trying to be something else. You're trying to um, inhabit something that isn't necessarily you. And I think role playing is something you're conscious that you're doing as well. You're making the choice to do it. You're engaging in role playing. I don't think you can subconsciously role play. I mean, I don't know. We'll just discuss that, but
I
I
like
don't.
that.
Yeah, I
I,
quite like that distinction.
I don't think it's a subconscious thing. It's an active thing you do cognitively. Um, but I think that's it for me, because so many things you can role play in so many different ways. Um, I mean, when I first started teaching, I had no idea what I was doing, so I was role playing a teacher until I figured it out.
Fake it till you
Right?
make it.
Because
Yeah.
I knew how a teacher should act. I'd been in school for a long time, so I was like, well, I need to be professional. I need to be commanding of the classroom. I need to be empathetic. I knew the qualities that I had to have, and I role played it until I faked it till I made it. Basically,
Yeah.
once I knew what I was doing, and I got good at teaching, which I am. Um, I found after my first year of working in FE, I was like, yes, I am a teacher now. Um, and that was something that I chose to do. I made that decision to do that, but that was out of necessity, not necessarily out of. It wasn't a game in that instance. But to cut my rambling, yes, I think it's something you cognitively choose to engage in to be something else that you're not.
Okay. I like that. I actually don't have that particular element as a part of my own definition, which I'll give shortly. But I do like that it's a conscious choice. I agree. I think that it does have to be a conscious choice. Um, yeah. So I need to addend my own definition, which is likely needlessly wordy, but I think that it lands where you both have landed. So I say that role playing refers to the act of temporarily assuming the identity, characteristics, and behaviors of a specific person, character, or role, which is generally going to be referred to as a persona, different from one's own, often in a fictional or imaginary context, which is the setting, and subsequently making decisions or interacting with others based on assumed attributes, motivations, or personal goals inherent to the assumed persona. Role playing
Mm.
can occur in various contexts, such as theatrical performances, improvisational exercises, educational simulations, and within role playing games, be they TTRPG, LARP, or to a lesser extent, video game RPGs. The essence of role playing lies in the exploration and expression of different perspectives and personalities outside one's own. Um, so that's what I have as role playing. And like I said, it's likely needlessly wordy, but it's because,
There's a lot. A lot. It's lots to cover with it.
yeah, there is a lot to cover with it because I mean it's role playing can be very know it if I know when I see it, right?
Mhm.
And in order to try and sort of boil that down to an essential sentence or two is not easy.
Mm-mm.
But I've given it a go. I still think that it's not an adequate definition. I still think that there are some things that are missing. but I think I've gotten it down to a point now where it's pretty workable.
So why? Let me ask you that. Why do you think that there are things missing from your definition? Like, what is it that you might not be able to put a finger on it, but like, what are you sensing that you want to be able to define better?
Okay, well, what does assuming the identity, characteristics, and behaviors of a specific person mean? Like characteristics in particular, what characteristics do they have to be? Like that's going to change provided the context. So if you're in a LARP situation, it's going to be physical, actual, like mannerisms and those sorts of characteristics. Maybe you know, apply makeup to show that there's a scar over your eye or like that sort of a thing. Whereas if you're sitting at a table, it's going to be a different context. So you'll still essentially have those characteristics, but it'll be more descriptive in your language, and it will also be you'll have to communicate it better in the role play at the table, because it's a matter of, well, where did the scar come from? So the scar came from this, you know, battle between a rival when we were children. He got one over on me. Maybe this is a hook that the GM uses later to bring the rival into the game, so that you now have some sort of personal goal or vested interest in the outcome, whatever it happens to be. And I find that sort of language, like my definition makes a lot of assumptions, right? I assume that we all understand what characteristics means, and we might not. And I assume that we all know what attributes means, and we kind of do, right? But again, depending on context, that's going to change. So in a LARP, you can't have, you know, you can't have a 20 athletics in a LARP unless you actually legitimately are an athlete, right? And so this becomes a lot like I feel like the further you drill down on it, and the more granular you become with trying to understand each of the individual terms, the less complete the definition actually is. That's why I say that.
I think it's difficult to. I don't think the. I think that there has to be a distinction between the different types of role playing, because, you know, as you said, you know, there's. If you look at like role playing from it has a cognitive and a physical load, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because role playing involves doing something physical and doing something mentally, but those loads are reversed. Like if you're LARPing, it's definitely going to be more physical than it is cognitive. But if you're sitting around a table doing TTRPG, it's going to be more cognitive than it is going to be physical.
Yes.
Right. So I think it's really hard to define role playing as a like very granularly as one thing, because the context for what you are role playing and what matters changes based on the way you engage in it. Because for example, if an actor is acting, they're role playing, but that requires them to that requires performance. Like it has a really big emphasis on performance, and it's got a really big emphasis on them memorizing their lines, and they aren't necessarily creating something. They're doing what they're told to do. It isn't their character. If they've got a good director, they might be allowed to add to the character or add lib or say, actually, I think my character would do this or that. But if you're on a LARP, it's your character, and you get to make those decisions. But it's you're acting still, right? LARPing is acting with extra steps. It's better, right?
Yeah, kind of. I agree.
Yeah. I haven't LARPed before, so excuse my ignorance. And then in TTRPG, it's your character, but you're playing within the confines of the GM story, right? But that's somewhat that has less of a physical element, less of a physical demand to it. So I think the definition should I think that there should be like a flow chart, and it should be like, this is like role playing in general, and then here's how this context changes when you engage in that in different ways.
So I was literally gonna do. That's what I was gonna do.
Yeah.
And it was gonna just have role play at the top, and then like basically all of the things that it could be coming down,
Okay.
and very intentionally not exclusive, right? Like someone could come in and be like, well, what about this? And it'd be like, sure, yeah, like, didn't think about it. I think I like your definition. I think I don't know that you need to define these things. I actually don't know that you need to have those in there, to be fair. I think like you could even simplify some of that, like attributes and characteristics. I don't know that you have to get into that to talk about just role playing.
Okay.
Maybe when you want to talk into about how that integrates into games, like you were just talking about LARP versus TTRPG, and like versus like you said like to a lesser extent video games, right? Which I agree. And I was thinking about this a lot today of like video games are really a really interesting part of this, right? Because you are role playing, maybe, but
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
it's really confined. So are you choosing to follow, you know, the story or whatever you are in the video game? Which to an extent you have to. Almost all video games have some A to B, right?
There has to be, right?
There has
Yes.
to be, or it doesn't really work as a medium.
Mhm.
And as you're going through, like I know if I'm playing Fallout, I'm gonna shoot everything in sight, right? Now, is that my choice? Is that my choice, or is that the nature of the game sort of steering me into that? Because that's the aesthetic of that game.
Mhm.
You're gonna get attacked. You're gonna fire back, right? So, am I
So you
role
just kill
playing, or am
everything.
I just kind of along for a ride?
I think this is a really interesting question, because with regard to role playing games, I would almost say that because now I have to be distinct with regard to tabletop role playing games and LARPs.
He's like, God damn it, God.
Yeah, it's like God, dang it. So with regard to the non-video game categories, there isn't I liken it to reading a book, right? So when you read a book from start to finish, you didn't read the book, or pardon me, you did read the book. You didn't win the book, okay? And if you put it down halfway through, you didn't lose the book, right? That's not how people speak about these stories. They don't speak of them in terms of a game where there's a win condition or a loss condition. And I think the same is true of tabletop role-playing games and LARPs. You sort of just exist in the world, and there's no really win or lose. You can die. That's not really a lose condition. It's just a natural outcrop of, being immortal. And you can fail to destroy the big bad evil guy. There's any number of things that can happen that aren't necessarily a loss, and there's any number of things that can happen that aren't necessarily a win. But in video games, there is a win condition, and unlike a book where if you put it down halfway through, it's not really a loss, there is a condition in video games where you don't choose to put it down, but you also cannot achieve the ending because it's too hard, or you're playing it in a way that it doesn't like to be played, and so it's sort of brick walling you. That becomes a very, very interesting piece to consider, because I would typically, generally speaking, disqualify. This is just from the hip. We can get into why. We can drill down on this critically if the conversation warrants it. But generally speaking,
I'm about to throw hands.
Yeah. But I would generally say, because look, I can play Space Marine 2, and I can be all for the
Emperor.
Exactly. I can go in there and run at it, but if the game just absolutely stuffs me, it's a little bit more of an interesting dynamic, right? With regard to role play, because of just I think the nature of video games. You are set down a specific path. In order to complete the game, you do have to achieve a very specific and very narrow set of resolutions. But if you don't get there, it's I don't know. It's just a really interesting consideration, I think.
Yeah,
It's like playing make believe on the playground, right? So I ran a Fallout game, actually this time last year actually, and I plotted my Fallout game out and quested it in a similar way to how New Vegas worked. And I knew exactly what the ending was going to be right at the start. I knew exactly this is what's going to happen at the end, and it did. They played the TTRPG, and I gave them there was the good thing, and then there was the bad thing, and both good and bad had their own kind of morally gray kind of maybe it's a bad idea thing tied to them. Um, and they got to the end, and they all really loved it, and they felt like their actions actually had consequences, and they had the illusion of choice. And they thought that by doing what they did got them to where they did, but it didn't. It was already, I had it all planned out from day one. I knew exactly what they were going to do, but they still played a role playing game, right? Now, the difference between that and a video game is that in the video game, that is all you can do. The video game does not have a dungeon master. So there was one time where they were looting a room, and Kyle, if you're here, he nat wand and got a power armor frame, and I was like, fine, sure, you get your power armor, right? Now, in a video game, that's not going to happen, right? Because they will design very specifically. They'll put items down for the level you're at, and
Yes.
it's limited by nature, because it's really hard for a game to have that freedom of choice. I mean, Baldur's Gate 3 does it fantastically, but there is still a limitation of agency.
Yeah.
There's still a limitation of, well, a choice ultimately, because the game can only have so much in it. Whereas with TTRPG, you get a dungeon master. So until we have that as an element in video games, I wouldn't say they aren't role playing games, but I think it's a role playing experience. It's not
Yeah.
you're role playing a set freedom within the narrative, but you don't have true ultimate freedom. So there is definitely a very big difference between them, and they should definitely be separate prongs on the category.
I agree with that. For sure.
100% agree. I also want to, because I'm seeing a comment that came in, and this is kind of interesting with given the conversation. We are talking really about role playing video games, not sandboxes.
Yeah, I noticed this too. First of all, hello, Junfus. Thank you for attending. Second, when I read the comment, I initially wanted to say, "Oh, well, we're talking about role playing games, not sandbox games." And then I thought about it a little more, and it's like, well, Minecraft, if you're gonna fashion a role playing game like player driven, you can definitely do that in Minecraft, right? Like you can invite people to your server, they can all have their own characters. You can now
make role play out of it, yeah.
Yeah, like you can make role play, but I feel like that's probably forcing it beyond its own boundaries, and it would require it would require rules. Like you would have to really say, okay, well, I know you can do this in Minecraft, but we have to all agree not to do X or not to do Y or to do X or that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Like who's going to be the big bad guy? Is it going to be you? And if
then
you're just inhabiting the big bad guy, how do you get to be the GM as well? Like it just becomes
and then you
really
start
have to
making a
build
rule book for it, and then you start making dice to make
Yeah.
random decisions, and before you know it, you got a TTRPG.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of leads me into. I mean, we don't have to move here yet, but it's just a night. It's like, the bridge is here.
Mhm.
I was thinking about like, okay, well, if that's role playing, what's a role playing game? And to
Hey.
me, it is a game that the mechanics and rules are in place to support role playing. Like that is the design of the game.
Yes. And in fact, if you want to, I can just jump into my definition of role playing game. Because I think now is a pertinent. But beforehand, Drew Fuzz calling me out. Absolutely correct. I completely forgot. Ben, I have to get you Drew Fuzz server information for Discord.
Yeah, please do.
This is on me. My
It's all good.
apologies.
All
I will
good.
get it to him.
We're all busy individuals.
Yeah. That was entirely on me. So that I can own that.
2 weeks, yeah.
So I have the definition that I have here for a role-playing game. Again, it's going to be incomplete, I would think, in the same way that I think my role-playing definition is incomplete. And this one is brand new. So I expect there to be maybe a little bit more to say about it, or a little bit, I think there's a lot more refinement that has to take place, but I'll just read it. We can go from there. So, a role playing game is the essential, non comprehensive guidelines, mechanics, and other details used to facilitate role playing, as I've defined it, but exclusively as a hobby or leisure activity. Frequently,
Mm.
this will include limitations on the types of characters the players can create and the specific math required to do so, the natural laws and other details of a usually imaginary setting, action resolution systems, as well as other tools central to the experience and any additional ephemera. I think this is a very, it's, there's not a lot hanging on the frame at the moment. I think that it's serviceable, but I think that it could definitely use more work.
I think it's maybe unnecessarily exclusive.
Okay, why?
Because why does it have to be a hobby?
I was gonna say.
And how do you do? And in this case, I do think you do have to define hobby.
Yeah, see, I think that in order, okay, and this actually comes about, and I don't know if he's here right now. He usually speaks up in the chat when he does. PH Arbex asked me last stream a week ago with Sable Phoenix. I can't remember exactly what his phraseology was, but he put the idea in my head. Why is it important to define role playing in ways that aren't important to us? Meaning, the channel is about role playing games. We discuss role playing games. Why do we need a definition that falls outside of that use? And my explanation was that because you can role play while not engaging in a role playing game.
Mm-hmm.
I think it became important to separate the two, and I think that the specificity of role playing game facilitating the role playing became important. And so he kind of put that bug in my ear, and I'm like, well, we can not mention that it has to be for leisure or that it has to be for a hobby, right? Like, I'll just reread this first part. A role-playing game is the essential, non-comprehensive guidelines, mechanics, and other details used to facilitate role-playing. Boom. It's direct and it's punchy. It's also, I think, maybe it's incomplete, because if the idea is that the usefulness of the definitions is kind of found in the convergence, then, and I couldn't think of a situation like where would a role-playing game fall outside of it being a hobby or for leisure, right? So a hobby is usually something that you do over time repeatedly, and you refine a skill set. But I didn't want that to exclude anyone who just shows up. Maybe they're at Gen Con for the first time. Maybe they're at a friend's house for the first time. It's role-playing night, and they just roll up a character and do it one time. They have no real intention of continuing, but they want to see what it's about. Like, I would call that leisure, right? Also, that's kind of like observational, like there's purpose behind there. It's maybe not just leisure. So I think you're right. I think that it's definitely, I think that it's the least stable part of the definition. But I haven't yet figured out a way how to say it to make the convergence relevant. Because I think that, like, obviously, I think it's going to be them working in tandem with each other, right? Because I think that you can have a role-playing book of rules, and you can implement what's in that book from cover to cover at a table with a group of people and not be role-playing the entire time, right? Meanwhile, just because you're role-playing doesn't necessarily mean that you're playing a role-playing game. I think
Correct,
that
yeah.
the convergence of role-playing while engaging with a system that's intended to facilitate role-play is really where that's the stride. That's the goal. That's what everyone, well, maybe it's not what everyone aims for, but it's at least what the definitions are aiming to sort of find,
What happens when you've got 2 6-year-old children that are role playing, I don't know, dinosaurs when they're playing make believe? There's no rules for that. They haven't got a rule book for that, but they're role playing.
They might have rules though. They kids
Yeah,
kids tend to have rules.
but they might. There's no, there's no. They might not, right?
And
Um,
I kind of
but
tried to
Yeah.
capture that, right? I kind of tried to capture that when I said essential but non-comprehensive.
mhm.
And there's also an element here of taking what you like and leaving what you don't like.
Mm.
So there is a sort of malleableness to any given role playing game, quote unquote. So like
Yeah.
I can take the Dungeons and Dragons game and
Mhm.
say I don't like this magic system, it's trash, and then pick up another magic system and plug it in, and as
Well,
long as I sort of work to smooth out the edges with the rest of the systems in the game, that's perfectly feasible.
yeah, the rule book's just a guideline anyway. You
Yeah.
shouldn't.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
not. It's not a Bible, and you shouldn't. Well, I mean, you can. You can choose to follow it rigorously if you like, but having some flexibility is always good.
I
But
agree.
We're
And
not a
this,
raw crowd here.
huh?
I don't think we're a raw crowd here. Like,
sometimes I am. Sometimes I can be very rules written. If the rule, so the Halo Mythic system is very very rules comprehensive. So I'm very rules as written with that sometimes, but I hand wave stuff for fun because
that's the point, right? We're all there for fun.
you have to have fun, right? And sometimes it's just kind of like, oh, don't worry about that, or
See,
like,
I view the fun piece differently. I think that if you have fun role playing, then the fun is sort of inherent to the activity.
only if
I
you're that
would
kind of
say
player.
that it's a specific experience that you're looking to achieve with any given role play game or session. And this gets into sort of an overarching philosophy that I have on role playing or role playing games. Like the all of the different systems as well as the role play should sort of act in concert and largely on a sliding scale depending on where you want to fall, um, in order to achieve the previously agreed upon experience, right? Like the experience that you're outlining with Halo, what is it called? Mythic?
Halo Mythic, yeah.
Okay. So the experience that you want with Halo Mythic is to allow your players to really get into the headspace of and the expressed action of Spartans, at least in this one game. I'm sure there are other options. I'm sure you can play
Yeah.
as Covenant,
There's a
Arbiters,
million,
whatever.
yeah, there's a million options, yeah.
Right, right. So, but for this particular game
Yeah.
that you have with these players, the idea is to, yeah. Dreamfoot says no, we don't have fun here.
No, only misery and hours making maps. Yeah.
Yes, yes. Spreadsheets on end.
Yeah. Oh, don't even.
But I think that it's that experience that's essential, right? So I think fun is baked in, right? So you're there, you engage in the activity to have fun, but you participate in any given game or session to really get the experience out of it that you've defined at the beginning. And I think that's where we can gauge like success, right? Like we can gauge success in, well, did we as players engage with this set of rules and this level of role play that we agreed at the outset in order to push us closer to achieving this experience? If we didn't,
absolutely.
why didn't we? And what can we change moving forward to get us closer to the experience? So I really think it's the experience that is central.
Well,
Go ahead.
What can complicate that is, I mean, I'm not a player types fanatic, but I definitely think there is that there's a bit of truth to it because every player group has players that will engage and play differently,
Yes,
and
sure.
are going to enjoy different aspects of the game. So my current group, I've got players that power game and they want all the best gear. I've got players that despite being characters that aren't social, want to make social characters. And I've got characters that enjoy, one of them was like, they got into a melee fight with an elite and got his arm cut off. And at the end of the session, he was like, that was fucking sick, dude.
Awesome.
And, and it's like, they all enjoy different aspects of it. So it can be hard sometimes. There is no, there isn't one rule fits all for it, because what they are wanting to experience is going to be very different from what player Z is looking to experience. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yep.
And this is why rule zero, session zero is really important, because you need to have a look at, this is what I'm going to run. What are you looking for? And most importantly, what's going to satisfy you as an individual? Like, are you wanting opportunity to role play? Are you looking to dungeon crawl? Are you looking to like, how do you enjoy playing? Because that's what CRPGs do quite well. And I mean, Fallout does it quite well. But if you look at like Underrail, or you look at Caves of Cud, or you look at I'm trying to think, like RPGs that have more choice. So I think Fallout has choice, but
It's limited. It's
Yeah.
very limited, and you're pushed towards a very particular path, even
Yeah.
though there's all of these options.
where is my son,
Yeah, right. Like you can.
John?
Yeah, it's kind of like, which faction do you align with? More so than, even though New Vegas has a great karma system, I will always argue. But so New Vegas aside, because I think that's maybe an exception, generally you're playing this sort of chaotic good sort of character,
Yeah.
and you're just
It's-
aligned with different factions.
But even then, you can still choose to engage and play, but you are, engage in different in different experiences, but it's more limiting. And I find that more old-fashioned like CRPGs,
Yeah.
they were basically like, oh, let's just get D&D and make it a video game, and had that optionality. Because the optionality is that's what I think really splits, distinguishes between different games, is choice, right? Choice with a GM, but how the players get satisfaction from that really varies, and it can be difficult to make a game that everyone's going to love. And there's definitely going to be sessions where a player's going to show up and be like, I really hated this session, it was really boring, because they just didn't get to do the thing they wanted to do that week, or someone else took the limelight and took charge that session.
I agree. I think that it becomes, you're kind of, as a GM, you are, you are a designer as a GM, right? You're designing this game and this session to be as agreeable as possible with the experience that each individual player wants to achieve. Now, even if you start at a session 0 and you sit down and say, okay, we're going to make a list of the things that are going to be involved with this experience that everyone wants to get out of the game, and you can sit down and you can codify that, and then later on in each individual session, like, people are gonna, it's the mercurial nature of the human psyche, right? Like, I might want to be gung-ho, maybe I want to be for the Emperor as an Ultramarine one moment, and the next moment I want to be a salamander and try to save as much as humanity as possible. The results of the battle be damned. Like, I can do that from session to session. I can even do that from situation to situation. Now, I don't know how likely that is. I'm not a psychologist. I don't have any of the data to back any of that up. But as a human being, I'm pretty expert at being a human, right? I've been a human for a while. I think it's a possibility.
Yeah, I mean, that's the beauty of being a human, is that you can choose. A character can change their mind. A character can go from like, oh, I'm gonna kill you, to actually, you know what, I'm not gonna kill you, and I'm happy with a player doing that. I think it's a problem the other way around. If the GM has a character that decides to do that, I think there should be a skill check behind that, because you want to show the players that that character is trying to change their mind. But if I have a player go, let's do this, actually, next session, no, this is a bad idea, it's like, okay, well, they're making a choice, they're changing their mind. I can't force them to do something. You can't force a player to play in a certain way, because then you're removing their agency, right? So,
Rocks fall and you die.
right, but sometimes, yes, but sometimes you can do that.
So no, yeah, sometimes you
Yeah.
can. It's just
Yeah,
I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying.
sour taste for the players, right?
Yeah.
It's never. So I think it's being able to be, I want to be an ultramarine one session, then next session my character is now magically more empathetic and I want to be a salamander. I think that's perfectly fine
Mm-hmm.
because that's how you're enjoying the game. That's how you're
Mm-hmm.
having fun. The only time I would really call something out like that if the action they were doing was really out of character for them. And then I'd say that seems a bit out of character, but okay. But I've never not. In fact, this actually happened yesterday. After they killed all the things on the bridge, one of the Spartans started grabbing armor and like strapping trophies to their armor. And I said, well, that's not really what a Spartan 2 would do. I mean, by all means, you can do that, but that's a bit uncharacteristic. And they were like, yeah, you're right. Okay. And they took a trophy back with them, but they didn't strap it to their armor. I didn't, but I made it explicitly clear to them: you do it if you want. It's just that to me is a bit,
Yeah. But that's the point of the GM, right? Though, is to kind of be that feedback, that player, like, right? So, like, to define feedback, right? Which for our audience, really, like, you get feedback as a player when you make a choice and it has impact in the game, right? And so in video games, this is really straightforward, right? Like you choose a red shirt and someone comments on the red shirt, and that's like a feedback from the video game on your choice. That's a really basic example, right? And as the
you
GM,
are now disguised as a member of the NCR.
Yeah, exactly. Right, exactly. And in TTRPG, that has to come from the GM. So I think that's like a really reasonable use of like sort of your GM role, like to be like, I don't know, like it's kind of that thing of, it's like you're literally Navi going, hey, listen, like this this is like maybe not what you should be doing right now. And they still had the choice you still left the choice in their hands, right?
Yeah. If they can justify it, I mean, that's the big thing for me, one of the characters was like, that they killed the shipmaster, and the one guy was like, I'm taking his sword, and the other guy was like, fuck you are, I killed it, it's mine. It's like, well, what about the other sword? It's like, yeah, fine, you can have the other sword, but I'm taking his helmet, I'm bringing it back. And they had that kind of out of character argument because he was like, no, I killed the boss, I want the shiny, like I deserve it, like I want it. And I just the players sorted that, and I let them have that because at the end of the day, they're humans and they're playing this game, and they want a thing that you want to empower your players. That should be the main thing. I don't think the players should have fun. I think they should be empowered, because sometimes you might want to do a session where all is lost and they're all gonna die tomorrow, and it can be, the experience you're making for the players can be negative in a positive way. Looking at you, Montola, and all of your research, but you can do that. But I think as long as the players have satisfaction from the experience, and it doesn't matter if it's a negative experience, as long as they're satisfied. And that's where it gets tricky, is as long as they're satisfied with the negative role play that they've done.
See, that is something that I absolutely agree with, and I think that, and maybe I was sort of remiss in attempting to communicate this with regard to the experience. I think that, I think empower is a much better word for the situation, and I think that the satisfaction that you're describing now comes from how close you get to that agreed upon experience that you're trying to create, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 100%. Because if you're running D&D Adventurers Guild, they're gonna win every session. You know what I mean? Because that's what you're there for. You're there to play the hero's journey. you're there to be this badass level 18 adventurer with this sword that your dad had when he died, and his dad had it before him, and it's a plus 10 sword that shoots fireballs or something. And that's what that experience is, versus playing something like, I don't know, Paranoia, or playing Call of Cthulhu. They're very different experiences. Like, I think if you play Call of Cthulhu, it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get eaten by a couch demon by the end of the session.
Sure.
And the players know that coming in. So I 100% agree with you. I think it is very contextual to the heroes. Yeah, I have a coworker that does that as well. We have a board up on the in our lecture room with one of our lecturers who teaches narratology, and they've got a thing which says days since the hero's journey has been mentioned, with like a countdown timer on it.
It's always
Is
zero.
it always zero? Yeah.
Well, the longest it's been is 14 days, and he's hoping to
Wow.
get it to be bigger. But it's I 100% agree. It's all down to what is the predetermined initial experience. Because I often don't I don't say to my players, what kind of game do you want to play? I say, this is the game I'm running. How are you going to enjoy it? Because I like having that control over the game. I like having that initial, like, I'm gonna run a grueling, brutal war campaign, or I'm gonna run a horror game, or you're the crew. So I'm doing a Dead Space horror game for Halloween, and I'm like, you're the crew of a salvage ship, so you're not playing soldiers. And
That sounds super fun, to be honest.
I really like this, and I like this as a design philosophy as well. Like, Jackson and I have been working on a game, and I'm not going to get into the details. It's not quite ready yet, but we've been working on a game, and it's very it's role play forward, but in this situationally, I think that it's pretty unique in its approach. But I also have other games in my back pocket that I have ideas for that I haven't yet created systems for and whatnot, and quite a few of them are, this is your guy. You don't get to pick. This is your dude. This is what you are. Now go and experience the world. And I think that is, I think first of all, it's very role play centric, because there's none of this, fiddly bits with regard to how you're going to create your character, what you're going to pick at what level, what skills you're going to use to be able to, there's none of that. Which can be fun and is very fun to some people, but I think that I get a kick out of this as a design philosophy. Like, you're on a salvage ship, you are a salvager. One of you probably has some sort of like pilot skill. Mm-hmm. One of you is likely some sort of strategic thinker, organizational thinker, because there's a hierarchy involved, because it's a job. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, you don't really get to pick. Like, here's what you can do, go do it.
Yeah.
I really, really like that.
I think also, if you both want to come to that game, you're more than welcome.
Oh, I will. I'll tell you right now, I will. Let me know when.
It's Saturdays. Or it will be Saturdays.
Okay.
And it will probably be 2 to 3 or maybe 4 sessions, based on how long it takes to complete.
Okay.
What time on Saturdays? We don't have to get into that now. You let me know.
I'll just I'll shill later. I think it's important to. I mean, this is just a reflection of like how I GM, because I like an element of control. It freaks me out if I don't have an element of control, but I understand that what makes good role play is players having choice. So I like defining it's like, you're all going to be soldiers, or you're all going to be this. Then they can go make what they want within the confines of that, and that makes me comfortable as a GM. And I'm not sure why I'm like that. I've tried to do some like introspection into why I'm like that. But for me, it helps kind of like, I look at like a sandbox game and I think, fuck, one of them's going to make something that I'm going to hate. And then it's going to bug me for the entire game, when it shouldn't. It shouldn't really matter what I think. The player can do whatever they want. So if I have this confine for the players to kind of build within, it helps me to kind of angle the game in in a direction while still providing them with choice. Even for the Dead Space game, I said to them, I was like, look, you can make a soldier, but you're going to have to sell me on it. I'm like, maybe you're an officer, or maybe you're security for the ship, like you're a guard. But I'm like, convince me why that makes sense. Because ideally, I said ideally, I don't want soldiers. I think that's exactly the word I used. I was like, so sell me on your ideas. Ideally, I don't want guys with guns because it's Dead Space, and last time I did Dead Space, they were all guys with guns. So
I think that's not unreasonable, right? So you are essentially presenting an experience that you want to participate in as the GM, as that player, and you're saying this is what I'd like to strive toward. This is what I want my systems and my characters to point toward, and I think that that's plenty reasonable. And if as a player I wouldn't get enjoyment out of the specific experience that you're aiming to provide, then that's on me to say, well, I think I'm going to sit this one out because this isn't necessarily an experience that I'll enjoy, or this isn't something I'm going to be involved in. And I would hope, I know that this happens, but I would hope that if people are concerning themselves with the experience as it is specifically defined, that it would help avoid these situations. Like, obviously there's going to be situations where players change their mind, or they want to do something different. Maybe it's a lot of character, maybe someone has to be focused on for a little while, so everyone else doesn't get as much time as they want to do. Like, that's going to happen. But I would hope that focusing on the experience kind of gives you a clear path forward, and it sort of disengages certain types of player actions that become antagonistic.
In the wrong kind of way.
Not adversarial. Like, I'm totally fine with players not getting along. Pardon me, characters not getting along, and because there's a lot of good role play that can come out of that. But if you have the goal of playing in a Dead Space game, and you're all going to be salvagers, and it's going to be a horror game, and a lot of people are going to die, and some dude like shows up in a clown suit, it's like, well, that's not the kind of game. Like, you're absolutely like actively trying to play against the experience we've all decided on.
It's a social it's the social the social contract.
Yes, exactly.
And I think that's why, I mean, I had this debate with one of my players yesterday, because he wants to buy another stealth ship for their group, and I'm like, well, the game is named after the ship you're in, so I don't want you to replace the ship. Then he was like, but I want us to use it because each time we fly down to the planet in transport, we get shot at, so I want us to have a stealth ship so you don't get shot at when we try and land. And then I'm like, I still don't like it, but I totally get your point. Like, so as long as the players can kind of sell the GM on it and be reasonable with it, I think it's acceptable. But this is also why it's clear to outline to your players, as you said, what that experience is going to be, so they can choose not to come play in that game, because then it's disingenuous on the players' half if they show up and make them think that is just there to fucking ruin the experience.
And it does ruin the experience, right? Like, so, because it's like, I'm as you guys were talking, especially I guess because we're talking, it's Halloween time and we're talking about.
Yeah, sorry, I'm gonna be insufferable this month.
I'm thinking about like, obviously more as like a kid, but we'd go to like haunted houses or haunted hair rides, right? And you buy in, like sort of
into it.
You buy in. Kind of the deal is, I'm going to accept that this is real for the duration. I'm going to agree to be scared. And there's always one asshole that goes and is like, this is bullshit and this isn't scary. And like, and it's like, you're making this not fun for everybody.
Allow yourself to be immersed, kid.
Just
or decide not to show up, right? Like, if this isn't the experience you're looking for, then that's totally fine. Excuse yourself.
Nobody made you do
Hmm.
this.
But children don't. I think children don't get that, right?
But
They might.
adults do
Well,
this in TTRPG.
well, yeah,
That's
yeah, but
my point.
that's because some players think the game's all about them, and some players think the idea is to win. Um, and this is where it's really this is why you need to kind of like screen your players, I think, and try and figure out who actually wants to be there for the experience, as opposed to who wants to be there just because they want to be someone else. I think there's you know how there's like Sunday Christians and then
Yeah.
there's Christians. I think it's kind of like that. You've got people that show up to role play because they just want to role play, and then you've got people who show up because they want to role play. And there's a difference, and they have an impact on the experience massively. Um, and it can abolish everything. Like it is really hard to set up mood and tempo in a TTRPG. Even harder if you're doing it online, and all it takes is one person to make a penis joke, and that's it. It's that gone. It's that 20 minutes of like being descriptive and setting up, ambience gone straight away. Now, in a game or a film, it's very easy to then lock back into that and then be re-immersed. But when it's something you're imagining,
Mm.
it's a lot harder because it's a cognitive process, and everyone's ability to be cognitive is different. So you can't expect everyone to re-engage in that experience as quickly or not. And because a film is 2 hours usually, you can probably sit and do it in one sitting, or a game you can probably do in most games are 10 hours now, so maybe 2 to 3 sittings, one if you're young and you still got free time to do that kind of stuff. But TTRPG is weekly. Mine's 4 hours normally, and it's easy to be like, oh, it's fine. Next week we'll do something, and it's easy to disengage.
Yeah.
And then when you're disengaged, you're not allowing yourself to get satisfaction from that experience because you've disengaged from it. Maybe you've actively disengaged, or maybe you've subconsciously disengaged, because it's really easy to do that. I mean, when it's not your turn, you're going to subconsciously disengage.
Yeah.
So
BGD mentions, regardless of how a role-playing game is defined with regard to social context and obligations, I find that the cocktail party analogy almost always applies. If you receive an invitation to an event that says black tie attire and you show up in a t-shirt and jeans, you're either a rock star or a complete dick. I completely agree with this.
100%.
I think that's
Yeah, I
a
agree with that.
pretty astute observation.
It's
And going back up, BG, I'm sorry, did you?
No, okay.
Do you want to, okay.
No.
I just want to
Yeah.
hammer on some of these comments. So BGD also says the GM can control the scope of character generation as seems appropriate while still offering players a chance to co-create their avatars.
Yeah.
For sure.
Absolutely.
You can pitch your DM or your GM a few characters, right? You can come in with like some stuff in mind. But it's about taking into consideration the work that they've put in as well of creating this world, and kind of like we're saying, buying in and having respect for that, like showing up to the game, I guess, really, that you're playing.
Yeah. It's I'm always upfront with like, this is the experience I'm trying to make. Usually this is going to be a tactical and gritty shooter, or it's going to be a milsim game, and they're all like, okay, right, I understand, this is the kind of thing we're going to be doing, and then they build around that. So I've never once, except for the one, I had that guy for a long time, and he's gone now. But he was the only person that would build characters specifically just to fuck everyone else over, because he was a narcissist. So, well, he didn't do it a lot, but he started doing it closer to the time before we removed him from the group, and it's just so petty when you do stuff like that. It's like, come on, man. It's like, we're playing a game. We're literally all adults here. Like, did you not mature when you left school or something? Like, this isn't all about how you can win and fuck everyone else over socially. This is about playing something together and it's cooperative storytelling, and that's the big thing, is that it's cooperative, right? It's the player and the GM, and it's the GM and the player. The GM can just say no sometimes, and you just got to just deal with it. And the players likewise are going to do stuff that the GM is like, well, that's, as the book says, you can do that, so I guess I'm screwed. And it works both ways, and that it's important to be flexible with that, because if you start hardlining stuff, then their experience gets ruined, their emotion gets ruined, you strip their agency, which makes them not have fun. And the moment you forcibly remove agency and choice, the experience goes down the shitter, and it all comes back to agency. It all comes back to that, right?
Yeah.
I think a role playing experience is something where the active participant has some agency over the role they are conforming to. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Because
I,
without that, then
well, there's kind of no point, right? Like if we were to like sit here and have a game, and I'm GMing for you guys, and every single thing you do,
I'm gonna roll initiative.
okay.
2.
I only have D6. Why do I only have D6s up here?
I'll roll a d6. It's fine.
Oh, okay. 6, I win.
Okay, right. So you go first. So
Yeah. I kill you.
Oh, I'm gonna. Well, I've got armor though.
No, I just kill you.
Oh,
That's like
okay.
no fun, right? Like that's just
Yeah, no. Instantly, that I was like, and plus, I rolled a 1 as well. So even if I did roll armor, I think I'd still die anyway. But
You did kill him.
But the thing
I
is, though,
did.
is that after rolling the 1, I think I'm more satisfied with dying, because I know my armor didn't save me. But when you just said you die, I was kind of like, oh,
yeah, right. Like, it just
instantly,
wind out.
I was like, oh, okay.
There was no interaction, and it's like, and that's kind of it. Like the whole point of all of us are drawn to these, games, experiences. I imagine because of the interaction and the level of chance and the ability to kind of bullshit our way through, right?
Well, there's a whole book
right?
on uncertainty, and it drives that. I forget the guy's name. I should know this. It's on my thesis. It's a paper called Uncertainty in Games,
Okay.
and they talk about how it's really important to drive the motivation of the player, because they don't necessarily know what's going to happen. They know something's going to happen, but they don't know what. So it drives the player to explore, because they're like, oh, well, the next room could be safe. It might not be safe. There might be a fight. There might not be a fight. But the player will feel more confident if they have a perceived a notion of being able to deal with the thing, right? So if you're playing D&D and you've got swords and shields, yeah, they're gonna want to go into the next room, because they're like, well, we can just fight whatever's in there. It's whatever, right? So yeah, I think it's important for the players to not know, but for there to be definitely like a solid wall for what the rules are, so that they at least understand what's going to happen when they go into that room. There are things in place. There is the rules are set and it's grounded.
Well, it sounds like you're talking about stakes.
Yeah. And they're gambling, right? They're like, well, if we do get into a fight, there's a good chance we'll win, so it's whatever. And then they'll want to explore. They'll want to do things, right?
Right, but that's it. It's like, I think it's a good thing to have. Well, depending on the kind of game you're playing, but like, there should be an element of like, maybe you can die.
Or consequence is always good.
Right?
Oh yeah, there has to be consequence.
And so, but it can't just be arbitrary, and it has to be within the mechanics, and it has to feel fair, and there has to feel like there's an element of agency to the choices that led there. So, right, it's like if you had rolled your 1 and I rolled my 6, and then I said, okay, you try to attack, I attack you, and then you can't attack me, and then a couple other things happened, that would have felt it would have been the same exact outcome.
Mm-hmm. But yeah,
would have felt totally different.
It did, like literally the moment. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, I don't want to go on about Alien RPG, but it's October, so I will. The Alien RPG only gets you to roll dice when the thing your character is doing, when the outcome that you're doing matters. So if you're at a door and you have to cut through the door and there's nothing happening, you're just cutting through a door, you should just let the players do it. But if they're being attacked by something whilst cutting through a door, then you roll the dice, because then the outcome matters.
Yeah,
right?
it's
Because then you can ruin a great moment as well, right? If
Mhm.
player does something really and it's like spectacular, and then you're like, oh well, roll to see if that works, and then they roll 1,
It's like,
and you're like, oh, that
yeah,
didn't work, even though it seems like it
mhm.
really should
Should
have.
have, yeah, niceness modifier.
Yeah, right. Like so, yeah, like you can't always roll either. You're right.
Are you gonna say something, Bacon?
Oh,
I
yeah,
was not.
sorry.
No, I'm just enjoying the conversation that's taking place.
Yeah,
Yeah, go
I
on.
think like instantly when I think what was magical about that moment when we rolled the dice was that immediately when I you said I died, and I was like, fuck that, I'm gonna roll the dice anyway. And when I saw that I got that 1, I was like immediately okay with it. I was immediately kind of like, oh, okay, it's fair, right? That I had my chance and it failed, and I'm dead now. And we had that. There was that unspoken kind of agreement there, because I'd rolled anyway. There was no rules for what we did, but I saw it was a 1, and I was like, okay, yeah, I'm dead. And it was immediately more acceptable.
Yeah.
Because
You
there was
mentioned
a
uncertainty in games, which is where this is coming from. Is it
yeah.
Greg Kostikian, I think is how you say the last name?
Yeah. Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
okay.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I've looked it up on Amazon. This is very interesting. I think I'm going to have to give it a read. It's sort of it's it is counterintuitive to my mind, because I am interested in really heightening a role playing experience. And so I want to be taken out of character necessarily as little as possible. And I think that the dice is something that does that. However,
Absolutely.
this is sort of indicating something to the contrary, that sometimes dice can be more engaging. Now, that might be like an out of character sort of engagement. It might be a personal engagement to me and not my character, but that can sort of push me further in character, because now I am engaged out of character. I'm also going to be more engaged in character. I find that very interesting, and definitely contrary to my brain. And so I think I'll find this very interesting, this read. That's it's very neat. It's very interesting.
And is it Brendan or Bernard Perrin? I forget his first name. It's B. Perrin. I only ever see B. Perrin on my thesis and references books. He talks a lot about information and how informing your player can actually be more terrifying than you think it is. Give your player a motion tracker, and it's like they can see where the enemy is now, and they should be less afraid. It's like, well, no, because now they can see where the enemy is, and it might not be in front of them, but they know where it is, or they get bleeped when it approaches them, and it's like you're arming your players with information, but that might not necessarily be a comfort, because if they know the thing they're fighting with is going to steamroll them, then they're going to run from it.
Yeah.
And the context really matters for the experience that you're making.
That's very, very interesting. It calls back. Pardon me for the interruption.
Yeah,
but
go for it.
Calls back to the last time that we had a stream. You established the idea of making stressful situations for your players, and doing so in such a way that makes them want to immediately end the stress, and relying on that to sort of foil them, right? Because they're going to make less optimal decisions because they want the stress to end now. And now you've added, they might not currently be in a stressful situation, but expecting that stress and arming them with the knowledge of the inevitability of that stressful encounter now makes this, what should be a sort of a tension diffuse moment, more stressful. And so it's like pre-ratcheting stress, right? Like they are already stressed. So when the encounter happens, it's not going to be a tension release. It's going to be a ratcheting of tension up because they're starting out from a more stressed base. It's very interesting.
Only if the player is immersed, though, because players can choose to ignore it, and they can choose to just be like, "Well, it's whatever. My character's stressed, but I'm not." And the moment they do that, goodbye.
Yep, out the window.
Yeah.
Or airlock in this situation.
It's always the airlock.
What do you guys think about sort of utilizing like dramatic irony in these settings? So basically, like giving your players information that the PCs don't have. So essentially, like going, what you don't see.
I've done that before.
Right.
It's good. I've actually done it strategically. In my current game, I do interludes where they get to do things from across the galaxy. They do like little side missions where they get knowledge that their characters don't have, but I want them to have, and they're starting to piece things together. And they did one session that was like 2 million years before humanity existed. And they went through a slip space tunnel and they left a bunch of like high-tech gear behind. And now they know it's all there. And now they can go get it. Now their characters don't know that, but they know that. And I told them, I was like, look, I'm going to give you some information that I want you as players to use. I'm giving you this information. So I think it's good because if you... It makes the players, it makes the players be like, oh, that's cool. It makes them think about something and not their characters think about something, because you want to empower the player, right?
Right.
That
and
doesn't
it's
necessarily
another
mean
level of
empowering
that
the
sort of
character.
engagement.
Yeah.
That's because the reason I'm reacting to all of this the way that I am is because this is like, I would put like role playing on a sliding scale with metagaming, right? So you're either in character and role playing, or you're out of character and you're metagaming. And my brain says metagaming bad. So you want to get as close to a role playing experience as possible, but apparently metagaming is not bad. And there are ways that you can employ it in order to engage players, which will subsequently engage their characters, because I think the two are very closely tied
They'll be
together.
motivated,
Right.
most likely, yeah.
And I find this a very interesting sort of, dance. So it's very contrary to how I, process playing a role playing game. But I mean, I need to come away from this conversation and think quite a bit on this, because it's a very, very interesting approach and effective, apparently. And I would not have thought that, right?
It seems counterintuitive, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It certainly does.
I am really sorry. The baby beckons. I'm going to leave you guys to continue, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, it's totally fine. Thank you, Jax, for coming and having the conversation. I'm always appreciative.
Thank you for having me. Sorry to dip, but
no, you're totally fine.
Child's gonna child, man.
Yeah, right.
Child's
yeah. But it's good to see you both, and I will be back again, I'm sure.
Good.
Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Then there was two.
Say again. Yeah, and then there was two.
And then there was two.
It's like an alien got him. Roll the 6. That's it. Go on.
Any excuse. Actually, the Dead Space book changes how they attack and makes them a little less broken, but also gives the player the ability to dismember them, like in the video game, which is great. It's like, oh, cool. You can just you don't even have to kill them. You can just cripple them and run away, which is great. I think metagaming is only bad if the player is using it to look at enemy stat numbers and trying to figure out how much damage they can do to kill it quicker. That I don't think that's bad metagaming, in my opinion.
I agree with that. And, there are definitely, and see, that's kind of my opinion on metagaming, right? Because that's all I've been exposed to. So metagaming to me is the player using information external to the character's headspace in order to, drive at a particular outcome, whatever that might be.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not it's bad for the role play. I think that it's okay for me to say that. It's
Yeah.
bad for the role play. But
Mhm.
there are some things that are good. And I guess I shouldn't be as surprised, because in a game like 10 Candles, are you familiar with 10 Candles?
No. Oh,
Okay.
well, yeah, I've heard it.
Okay.
I've been told that I need to play it. But I haven't played it.
Well, that's there are two physical elements in 10 Candles. There's the actual candles that you see getting blown out, and there is the dice pool, which is constantly shrinking, and that's all obviously metagame information, right? But it's helping engage the players. So I shouldn't necessarily be super surprised about this, but I guess the reason is because, like, I would a week ago, 2 weeks ago, I would have called 10 Candles a story game, right? And there's that constant battle between, well, it's a story game versus a role-playing game, or what is a story game versus a role-playing game. I should probably shut these blinds. It's washing me out. But in fact, I might ask for a moment so that I can shut these blinds. Give me 1 second. If you
The Emperor's light.
Yeah, sure. You can see it other side shining on me. Give me 1 moment if you don't mind.
Absolutely. So, whilst we're all here, yes, on this episode of Supernatural. Trey, what's MOTW? What's that?
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that.
Monster of the Week, of course it is. Yes, absolutely, yes. Well, the metagame describes the players, and they really liked it.
I've never played Monster of the Week. I'd like to, though. A friend of mine I think he runs still a weekly game of Monster of the Week. I could be wrong.
But it looks too. See, I looked over it. I think I've got a bit on it on my faces. I looked at it and I was kind of like, eh. And then I looked at Delta Green and I was like, yes. But they're the same fucking thing, basically.
Gotcha. I've heard of Delta Green too. I've just never.
Yeah.
I've never played it.
I was sold in Delta Green in like half a sentence. They were like, it's Call of Cthulhu but with guns, and I was like, oh yes. It's like
Gotcha.
your secret CIA agents. And I was like, ah. I was like, yes, Inquisition, but not 40k. Good. I was like, oh yes.
Inquisition 40k can be good too, though.
It's how I started playing TTRPG. So
really.
Dark Heresy was my first.
Okay.
Right. This has forever altered my like brain chemistry with TTRPGs, because I played Dark Heresy and I was like, armor per hit location, fire rate, range, damage stats, and then I played D&D and I was like, what do you mean it just hits?
Yeah, where is all this? Where
I was like, yeah. Why is the armor equal across every limb? And it like, I was so annoyed by D&D the first time I played it with how easy it was. I mean, I've changed my opinion now. I like D&D. I play D&D. Not a big kind of running it, but it's an okay system. But I just like things where it's a bit more tactical and there's more stuff to it. Also, session 1, half our party died. And I was like, yeah, hell yeah, that was cool. I was like, we're just expendable people. I was like, average mook will just kill us and we will just die. And that's been every game that I've run since. I don't like games where the players are invincible. Even in my Halo game, they may be strong, but all it takes is like the wrong stray bullet to hit them and they die. So it's still the same thing, which is great. But again, that's the experience, right? And that is going to be different for who you run for, especially if you're running at a con as well. That might be quite difficult because you've got to make sure that people are going to enjoy the experience, but they may have never role played before, or
I
they
don't I don't I don't even understand how you can like run a con because there's it feels like the social contract is so just incredibly
fragile.
yes, it's so de minimis, it's so fragile. It's just because you don't know who's walking up to your table. And you don't know like their goal could be literally to just be a disruption. And that is that just seems very, look, if you can do it, more power to you. I would be
Mhm.
petrified to do something like that.
Yeah, I played Alien at the UK Games Expo this year. It's the first time I've ever played it, and the group we had were fantastic. They were they were phenomenal players. Um,
Well,
but
that's good.
I've also played in a game at Worldcon, and the player group wasn't that great. And I've seen it now from both sides, where it's kind of like, okay, maybe I just lucked out the first time that I played. Um, and so it's like even the GM didn't really know the rules, and straight away it bugged me because I was like, I know those rules at the back of my hand, and I didn't want to be that guy, and I didn't want to correct the GM. But when we took a break, like a snack break, I was like, "You're doing stress wrong, and it's punishing us too much." Um,
Ah,
and it's like we're having cascading stress now, because we're adding too many numbers. And then they were like, "Oh yeah, I see, thank you." And it wasn't a negative experience, but it could have been, you know.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so I think it's important that um, the it's the players you get, and how, because the players are going to have an impact on your experience, and then therefore everyone else's experience, regardless of how much you try. The group are going to do that, so you need to make sure that you just need to see how that plays out, and then the GM has to manage that, right? And then that can make or break a group. I mean, I had one bad player for a very long time, and it nearly broke my group, and that ruined everyone. Like, people were showing up and just didn't want to engage in conversation with the guy because he'd start an argument.
Oh, yeah, that's
A-
bad.
and it's like that immediately ruins their experience. I mean, it was, if I made an encounter that was remotely difficult, I was worried about him kicking up at me and yelling at me, and I'm like, it was, if it's ruining the GM's experience, then it's going to ruin the player's experience. And then are they even role playing at that point, or are they just showing up by courtesy, or are they having fun? Maybe, but maybe not all the time. Maybe not as much fun as they could be having. Um, so there's like so many different variables that get in the way of,
Yeah.
well, what to consider, um, for making role play empowering. Which, but to bring it back, because I know I like to ramble, but to bring
That's
it
totally
back to
fine.
like the first question is like, what is role playing? Does any of that matter if you're acting? Because if you're being paid to act, and you're being paid to role play
Hmm.
professionally, does it matter if you're having fun because you're being paid to be there? It
Uh, that's a good question. Does it matter? Because because I think it's very difficult to address to like put things in terms of fun or to address the topic of fun. Um, because I feel like it's a lot of times that's what people want to fall back on
mm-hmm,
with regard to, oh, well, did you have fun? It's just our goal to have fun, and that's why I phrase it the way I do with regard to, fun is inherent to the activity. You choose to role play because it's fun.
what is fun?
But yeah, but gauging the success, well, yeah, for what is fun, which is also why you can't really say that you've gauged a successful session based on how much fun people have had, because that's, you can't. I mean, good luck. I guess you could define it, but it's going to be hyper granular depending on the individual.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but with regard to like I have fun role playing, so I'm going to role play and it's going to be fun. This is the experience we've all agreed on having.
Mm-hmm.
We're achieving that experience, but somehow the fun has been sucked out of the room for some reason, right? Which is a possibility that can happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's another layer to consider, right? So like the game mechanics and
The players,
the role play and all of that could have all pointed definitively toward the experience, but there's something with regard to the players that just really made it not
fun.
palatable. Is it unsuccessful because of that? Well, I guess it depends on the metric you're applying.
Oh,
Right?
yeah, because I mean, you could run a perfect session, but everyone hates it.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I mean, I think it's important to look at it from a mechanical and a social element. I think
I agree.
Socially, did they have fun, and mechanically, was it designed well?
Yeah, and I think that there's a social element there to consider, and that's maybe not something that I had necessarily considered alongside of the mechanics and the experience and whatnot.
It's what makes TTRPGs and not
Yes.
CRPGs, because there's a social element to it. Well, no, because you can shoot myself in the foot. Because you could technically play Fallout 76 with other people, then you've got your social element. It's not like if you were to compare like playing Fallout New Vegas, you're playing by yourself. Whereas playing an MMO or Fallout New Vegas, Fallout 76, you're playing with other people, and that can lead to a roleplay experience where there's social elements to it.
Right, it can.
And also with solo RPGs, if you're playing a solo RPG, you're still role playing. You're just by yourself.
When you say solo RPG, do you mean like specifically
TTRPG? Sorry.
Okay.
So,
a solo mode TTRPG. Okay.
Yeah. So you're still role playing in a solo TTRPG. Just you have to be stricter with, because you use. I haven't played. I backed one on Kickstarter, but I haven't played one before. There was a chart where it's like yes, and yes, but no, and it's like you have to be a bit stricter with that. But you're still role playing, just not as much, or not as trying to think of the right way to frame it. So I'm still a firm believer that you are role playing. It's just the impact that, well, the experience you're having is different. And I think it's more fun with other people, because that's what makes the role playing experience. That is what makes it more enjoyable and makes it more unpredictable. And that's why they're more fun than video games, in my opinion, because you've got 7 other people around the table that have direct input and impact into what happens today.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And the way that so Jackson and I had a conversation about solo play TTRPGs, and it's still a little mystifying to me. I haven't really done as much thinking about it, or even playing them as much as I should, in order to really kind of get it. So I'm still in a situation where I don't get it. But gosh, I lost my train of thought. Man, right off the rails.
Solo RPGs, you don't get it. Chat with Jax about it.
Yeah, what were you saying before?
Social, about how the social construct of it, because like with solo RPGing, you aren't going to have the social element.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. I know where I was going. Okay. Thank you so much. So the reason I don't get it is because it was all just a preamble to say this. The reason I don't get it is because I would typically classify a TTRPG as an individual experience in a group setting. So you are the only one experiencing the thoughts of your particular character, just like everyone else around the table. However, you are acting in such a way, you're describing your actions, you're speaking in first person, and you are providing material for those other players at the table to then experience their characters via internal monologue, via emotional, emotional situations. And that's kind of why solo, it doesn't really make sense to me. I guess you can still get that kind of sort of, I guess, maybe. But it's less social, right? There's no social element to it. So there's an element of randomness. There's an element of unpredictability. And even that, like, it's not always random, right? Like sometimes you can count on someone to behave a certain way in a certain situation. So when you present yourself, when you present your opinions, when you present described actions, you know exactly the way that they're going to react, and they react in the way that you predict. There's a little bit of satisfaction in that. And so it's I don't know, maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but
no, yeah, it's a different experience,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
And that, I think that's, but you know that going into it though, so it's not like you aren't going to be shocked by it. You aren't going to have the I think the player very much knows what they're getting.
Mm-hmm. I mean, at least with regard to the solo RPG, or solo play, you can definitely tailor it to the experience that you want to get.
Yeah,
No one else
right.
can stop you. Yeah.
Unless you wanted to stop yourself.
Unless you, but well, I think there's maybe a little bit more going on there then.
Yeah.
Juden Fuzz. I wonder if the issue Bacon has are the same for solo as for GM-less play. I don't know. There's so much out there that I need to really sit down and have a think on. And it's like, in this GM-less play, I have taken a look at them, and I really feel like it's more of a distributed GM model than it is truly GM-less, right? So you distribute the different responsibilities to the different players. There's no central GM player who is a player and then also has these additional responsibilities. You just kind of divvy out and share the responsibilities. That's okay, right? Like you can structure a game that way if you want to do it. I don't have any issues with that. It's just, is it truly GM-less? No, probably not. But also, you have to really work with the vocabulary that people have latched onto. If that's what we're calling them, then that's what we're calling them. I'm happy to do it. It's easier for me to wrap my head around that than it is solo play for sure, because you're still in a group setting. It's still a an individual experience in a group setting. So it feels easier to grasp in that regard than solo play. Because Trey G says here, solo RPGs remind me of playing with action figures when I was a kid, but also kind of like creating your own novel, but you have to play through until the end. And that's kind of something that Jax and I have said, not to, throw anyone under the bus. I am guilty of having said this. So it's not like Jax has only said this, but it feels kind of a lot like writing a book with extra steps, right?
That's what there was. I think it was a Reddit post or a Tumblr post, which was like, what if I just like play an RPG by myself and then make the story that way? And the top comment was like, that's called writing a book.
Yeah, that's called writing a book, my dude.
Yeah,
and it feels that way. And look, maybe I'm just not familiar enough with it. Maybe I just don't know the reasons why someone would engage in solo play. Like, I'm sure there are practical reasons for doing so, like
time commitment. If you've got children, if you still want to role play, it's more like it's more like playing a game than you are role playing. I think it's like you're playing a thing with set rules. As long as you conform to them, you get an experience. It's got an element of role playing to it. You're still role playing. It's just diminished. It could be much more if you had more other people.
So it's like, on the one hand, it's like writing a book with more steps, but it's also kind of like playing a video game with less steps or with less.
Yeah, it's like
right. So it's like it's this weird sort of, and I'm not doing it justice by describing it this way, and I recognize that, and I'm maybe not being fair, but I don't think personally, I don't know. I have to play them more. I have to really kind of sit down and say, okay, Bacon, it's time to solo play and really see what it's about and really engage with the system in that way. So what does Drudenfoot say here? I still think even in regular role playing of my characters, the same way I did when I played with dolls as a kid. But well, I feel girls are more likely to play with their dolls together. Okay. That's a reasonable take. I don't think I have much to add to that. Trey G, going back to the book. I grew up reading Choose Your Own Adventure books, so to me, it's just an evolution of those. It kind of is. And some Choose Your Own Adventure books will even say, go get a 6-sided die, right? Like some of them actually did that. At least some of the ones that I read when I was a kid. I remember going to Catholic school, and there was a whole shelf of Choose Your Own Adventures in the library, and that's all I would ever go to when we were allowed to go to the library. So let's scroll up here. There's actually some stuff we didn't mention. So
it was Fuzz said in horror games, dying is fun, and I'll always go back to what Tanya Krasinska said, which is horror games actively promise transgression and death as a spectacle. So
yes, yeah,
death in horror games should be violent and fun.
Yeah, and this is something that I didn't want to interrupt you on your train of thought, but going back to this, I'm glad you brought this up. I actually prefer this. Like, I prefer a Call of Cthulhu style game or an Alien style game. I like the threat of death, and I find it's not a matter of when I will die, but how spectacularly and is it, how big of a fight am I going to put up, or like that sort of thing. And sometimes it's no fight at all, and sometimes you're able to last. But I think that it's likely it's for a horror game, it's probably not the best mindset to have, right? Like being excited about it, because it can impact the experience negatively. I think we were talking about that earlier, or you were talking about that earlier. So there was a new channel viewer, Roll, who says, reminds me of the Tartarus Gate, which is an RP of sci-fi horror by Grant.
I Googled it, actually.
So did I. I love being recommended games, so I am very interested in taking a look at this. So thank you, Roll. I appreciate you.
Yeah, I looked at it, and straight away I noticed, I was like, okay, it's 4 mechanics. That's like, it's mechanically light. And I always see like a reoccurring trend with horror games. They always seem to be mechanically light, which allows you to focus on playing the game rather than being bogged down in rules. I think Call of Cthulhu is an exception to that, because the game Call of Cthulhu, I wouldn't say inherently it's a horror game. It's an investigation game, which is horror themed.
Yeah,
same with Dark Heresy. Dark Heresy is an investigation game that doesn't necessarily have to be scary, but absolutely can be, dependent on how the GM runs it. Yeah, I did look at it and I was like, yeah, hell yeah. I was like, rules light my heart.
I haven't played in many rules light games. I'd like to.
You'll get to play on my Dead Space game now.
Oh, okay, cool, awesome. What system are you using?
It's Alien.
Oh, great. Okay,
cool. Yeah. Well, Alien with extra steps.
Charlie, I'm way late getting to this, but hello.
Hi, Charlie. How you doing?
All right, I'm still going through these. Monster of the Week. I think you addressed this one, right? Monster of the Week.
Yeah.
Okay. Josh B. My group had a fun bit of metagaming once in an online session with a puzzle where the solution was behind the DM on his wall. That's
great.
That's neat.
I've done ciphers with my group before, and one of my players got out a sheet of pen and paper. Actually, the one thing I love this. I had them do a Halo game we did a few years ago, and they were getting surrounded by the Covenant, and there was this Forerunner glyph they had to decipher, and it was just a Caesar cipher. And the fight went on whilst one player deciphered it, and rather than him having to make a skill check to decipher it, I had him actually decipher it, and I gave him a picture of the Forerunner alphabet.
Oh, wow.
The letters, and I gave it to him, and I was like, figure it out. And then the rest of them just did combat whilst he sat there with pen and paper trying to figure it out. Unfortunately, for this player in particular, it really stressed him out, and he didn't enjoy it. So I didn't do it again, because I sprung it on him, and he was like, I didn't like the pressure of it. He made a character who was the alien tech guy, and he was like, I would have appreciated just being able to roll for that. And I'm like, okay, you know what? he's like, it was a cool idea, I just didn't enjoy it. And I'm like, okay, fair. Thanks. Thank you for telling me.
Yeah. And role playing, and this is something that Sable Phoenix said. I don't know if it's attributable to him or if it's something that he passed on to me from elsewhere, but role playing is essentially, at its most basic level, is a conversation. And so, having that opportunity to tell you, hey, that was cool, but I didn't really like the pressure of it, I think is really important in the conversation to sort of continue to try and achieve that experience that you've all agreed to. BGD says a lot of people hard on playing with randos, particularly online or at cons, because of the unknowns. I would argue that randos are just friends you haven't gamed with yet. Most of the time, I think that may have trailed off. Or most of the time, he says. Okay, I get the idea. More talk about Delta Green. Horror games dying is fun. I think we're all caught up. All right. And it's very late for you. So I think that we can probably end here unless there's more that you want to discuss. Or we can end on your definition of a role-playing game, because we got what role-playing is. And it's funny, like, I think that most definitions that people provide for role-playing are reasonable and readily accepted by most other people. Like, even if my definition is different from your own, they're pretty similar, right? And I think it's in defining the role-playing game bit that the issues begin to crop up, and there needs to be more explanation, or there needs to be questions on why this particular element's in the definition. So if this is putting you on the spot, then we can come back to it next time.
I think a role-playing game is when the game has, you start role-playing the moment the game gives the player choice. Meaningful play choice. Like, are you going to save this village, or are you going to let them all burn? Now you're role-playing because you're assuming a role of a character and you're making choice. It isn't like a shooter or a narrative like Halo, for example. You're just playing a game. You're playing Master Chief, right? You're playing a shooter. You could argue that you're role-playing as Master Chief, but just as likely as you could assume the player is, you can also assume the player isn't. It isn't the designed intent. It isn't the designed experience that they want the player to be taking a role. I think technically any interactive experience is role playing, technically, because anything that involves a player being something that isn't them, they're taking upon a role. But I think a role playing game is something where the player has choice to impact the experience they're playing more than just kill the enemy. Like, it's like, join this faction or build your character this way. Let's pretend with some resolution mechanics. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So this is very interesting. So is it possible that what is traditionally thought of as a role-playing game is not one thing, right? So if in a situation, we were talking about rolling earlier and how you should only make them roll if something important is happening, or if there's consequence that can come out of failure. Like, if you're climbing a ladder, you're not going to have them roll for climbing the ladder. They can just climb the ladder. But if they're climbing the ladder under some sort of duress, then okay, let's see if you can make it up the ladder. And in the moment of choice is where you're role-playing. So that's where the role-playing game is, right? But until that, you're just kind of moving a pawn around, like on a game board. So or a war game, which is, where they come from. So it's something to think about. I think it's very interesting. It's something to think about. I think that, my definitions aren't quite there yet. Who knows if they ever will be. Spoiler alert, probably not. But I think it's neat to try. Neat to try to get there. All righty. Well, I don't want to keep you up later than I already have. So I think this is
It's not a
probably good.
problem. No, I'm not going to bed for a bit anyway.
Oh, okay, all right. Well, what else do you want to talk about then?
Um, what do you think? Do you think that we is it role playing if you're playing more than yes, no, fuck, um, uh, it's difficult. Staring at my ceiling. I think yeah. I think if you're taking upon a role in the game, well, I think it matters on the player. I think if the player is feeling like they are getting the chance to role play or they're getting a chance to experience that, then you are role playing. Like I said at the start, you choose to engage in role play. You can play New Vegas and be like, "Well, the game said I'm a courier, so I'm a courier, and I'm gonna play the game as the game is telling me to." You're not allowing yourself to role play. You're just playing as the character, right? Likewise, if you play any kind of pre-written module that's got pre-made characters, yes, you're role playing as characters, but you're not. A little bit of your choice was taken away from that.
Mm-hmm.
So you're still role playing, but you could be more. You could be actively role playing more. If you'd built your own character, right? There's a bit more role playing to it. I think technically, if you want to be really broad, anytime you play a video game, you're role playing because you're playing someone that isn't you, and you're using things and you're playing in ways that you wouldn't do, like running out in front of enemies in power armor. Like, when are you ever going to do that in real life, or when are you going to feel confident enough to run out in front of people? You won't, but your character does. So technically, you're role playing whenever you play a video game, if you want to be like really broad with it. But I think that's an unfair thing to say, because when we say role-playing game, we all have, hey, look, Jax hit me with the "you don't really role play" when I told them about what kind of games I run. Yeah.
You don't
I
really
think
role play.
it's wargaming with a slice of role playing attached to it. It's when you say role playing game, we all have this designed kind of like definition of, well, role playing game is like, it's Baldur's Gate, it's D&D, it's Fallout, it's Borderlands. Borderlands is an RPG, right? No, hang on, Google. Is it? No, not the film.
This is why I don't like bringing up video games, because it's just a whole other thing.
Action role playing first person looter shooter. That's a lot of words.
Lot of qualifiers.
So, it's got role play elements.
It sure does, yeah. But what do we mean by role play elements? Like, do we mean
you can
just tracking stats?
Build your character there.
You can, yeah, you can build your
and
character.
The game has choice.
You do get to use, stat points and allocate and whatnot.
Yeah. But it's not like Baldur's Gate, where your actions have consequences, really. But you're still role playing because you're building. The game isn't telling you how to play the game. You can play how you want. Well,
yes.
Within the confines of the game, you can play it how you'd like. I know how comfortable to run out to people. Yeah, 100%. Do you find first that when you role play, you're less socially anxious?
Say that one more time.
First, they said, indeed, I never feel comfortable to run out to people. Social anxiety is a bitch.
Oh.
And I asked, I was like, do you feel more confident in socially engaging people when you role play, when you're playing as another character? Like, do you feel you're able to do that? I mean, I think last time we were here, briefly mentioned Bleed Fury, and you kind of went, oh. But does it help, Fuzz? I'm curious. Or have I just asked loads of questions and made the social anxiety worse? Because when we roleplay, we are someone else, right? In fact, when I first started teaching, my coworker told me, he said he was like, you got to role play. It's like, when you're dungeon mastering, you're playing as an inquisitor and you're in charge, and you've got all this authority, and it's like, just pretend that you're them when you're in the classroom. And I did, and it worked. And it gave me some like falsity of power, and it well, not power is the wrong word. It gave me the illusion of competency and being. I was like, no, actually, yes, I know what I'm doing, and it removed that imposter syndrome a little bit.
Trey says, by the way, I'm asking because I still have not come to a conclusion on these philosophical ideas. Yeah, I mean, I haven't either. And it's like any question that you could ask me, I could give you an answer to, and then change next week because I've considered it a little bit further. I've considered it a little bit differently. Like, I'm not even too sure that games exist on a role play versus story game continuum anymore. I think that it's just because stories always result, because that's the nature of human activity. So the nature of human activity is that there's always a story to tell because my favorite example is how'd your day go? At the end of the day, you come home, someone asks you, how did your day go? Whether it's a parent or whoever it is, they ask you how your day went, and you're going to structure the events in your day to get the reaction you want. You are angry that someone did something that they shouldn't have done, and so you're going to craft a story to sort of elicit that response in your audience to get them on your side. Maybe you had a great day, you're going to structure the events to elicit the joy. So it's always a story, and role-playing games always result in a story. It depends on how you put the pieces together at the end, how you construct that story, but you are creating the events to provide a story to someone, and as that is always what is going to result from a role-playing game, is it really beneficial to even call something a story game? What does a story game look like? Especially because, like, I can be told, right? So I can tell you as a role player that I can take a game that doesn't really have a focus on role play, but I can use the systems in that game to role play with, right? I can also then turn around and say, well, here's this game that is very geared toward role play, but I can use that to, quote unquote, play a story game with, like out of character, move a character around as a pawn.
Mm-hmm.
Just establish the events to be able to tell a story, essentially.
We've done that before. Me and my friends played 40K, but we did it. We played Heralds of Ruin, which is like Kill Team with like way extra steps, and like we named all our characters and did a bit of role play to it, and we added role play to something that didn't have role play.
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. You can do it the other way around too. You can remove role play from something, and so I'm less inclined now to say, well, it's role playing game versus story game. I think it's just role playing game, but it exists on a continuum. It's either heavily role play or it's less role play, and it's all going to depend on the experience that you want to achieve.
Yep.
So I don't even think, like, at this point in my thinking, is story game really even a thing?
It's design intent, I think.
Say again?
It's design intent.
Yes, it is design intent, but the fact that I can, regardless of the intent of the designer, I'm using my hands a lot, regardless of the intent of the designer, I can always use the system to play it however I want to play it.
Because that's the magic of being a GM. The rules look like a guideline.
Exactly.
And you can follow it as much or as little as you choose to.
Yeah. Exactly. And like, I don't, in that circumstance, which is the reality of the situation, I don't think there's a distinction to be made between story game and role playing game. I think that it's probably easy to label the two extremes of the continuum that way, so that you know exactly where you're falling. But as far as like reality of the situation, I don't necessarily think a story game even exists, right? There are games like Troll Babe, which I've reviewed, which I called a story game, but that's before I came to this sort of conclusion. I've called it a story game. You can role play in that system, but like there are codified mechanics within that game that say, okay, now you're out of character and you need to have conversations between the GM and the players to see exactly how you want this scenario to go. And you establish the different players, you establish the different contributors to the situation. And, you know, my initial reaction was sort of, I want to say revulsion. It wasn't really like I didn't revile it, but it was very anti role play or counter role play or the opposite of role play, because it was literally expressly telling you one of the systems in the game is to remove yourself from the headspace of the character, to have a conversation with the GM. You know, does that make it a story game, or does that just make it an extremely narrowly defined role-playing game that's slammed up against the far edge of less role play, or maybe not even less role play, but you know, more out of character action, however you want to phrase it. Obviously, these are ideas that I'm sort of just now starting to kick around. It's been a week that I've been sitting on this, but to really get back to Trey, it's like, you know, I haven't reached a conclusion on these philosophical ideas. Do I think story games are a thing right now in the moment? No, I don't. And does that mean that that's correct or true or is not going to change by next week? No, by no means. So I think it's just a constant progression. It's constantly just trying to be as honest with yourself as possible, as honest with the reality of the situation, and seeing what feels right. You know, seeing what sort of what clicks, what is the reality, why it, like, you know, question the convention of calling something a story game. And I feel like that's a pretty new thing too. Like story games weren't a thing in 79, 80, right? Everything was just a role-playing game. And then, but you know, that doesn't mean that story games didn't grow out of that. Maybe they did. And I'm wrong to say that story games aren't real. Yeah, Amber, that's a very good example.
I think
this is correct. Troll Babe review was before I quote unquote reached enlightenment, according to Jordan Suds.
I feel like with video games, I think there definitely are. I think video games, it's easy to categorize them because there's less player input on a video game.
Oh yeah,
there is X to B, even in role playing video games, like I said earlier. And I think with TTRPGs, you could do anything with any system if you really tried. I mean, I'm in a Facebook group called "I'm begging you to play any other system other than D&D," because I always see people they're like, game. It's like, oh, I love D&D and I want to play Fallout, and then they make a Fallout conversion for D&D, and it's like, no, there's a Fallout RPG.
Yeah, just play the game.
Or I saw one which was like, oh, I'm trying to make this a sci-fi book, and it's like, just play Starfinder. It's like there's other systems that exist, but if you wanted to, you could do whatever you want with D&D, and I'm not opposed to that. Players are going to have fun the way they want, and I think if you tried hard enough, you could make anything, and that's up to the creativity of the group and also their willingness to accept that tonal shift and their willingness to change how they engage in roleplay with that experience. Because it's like, you know, all of the Free League stuff uses the Year Zero engine, you know, so Tales from the Loop, Alien RPG, Coriolis, all play the same way, but they're very different experiences. So, you know, the world's your oyster and you can do what you want. The only thing that stops you or limits you is the Dungeon Master and the players wanting to, you know, and I think, you know, the shift from wargaming to role-playing games, and I think even in war games there's role-playing because someone has to play the enemy, someone has to be attacking.
Mhm.
You're not attacking anything, but all of a sudden the objective becomes important because you want to win.
Mhm.
And there's a strategy to it, and now you're role playing a general, you're role playing a commander, you're moving an army. So there's an element of role playing there. It's just not the focus. The focus is to outwit your opponent. That's why people play chess, right?
Yeah.
But is chess a role playing game? Oh, and real philosophical.
Yeah. Let's end on that.
Yeah.
It's just a role-playing game. I actually do need to get going though.
Oh,
I need to get, you know.
what a point to end it on. Is a chat is chess a role playing game? Yes or no?
Yeah, we'll get back to that the next time I have you guys on. Thank you, Ben, so much.
Anytime, yeah.
I value your time. I value your input.
I value
Thank you
your
so
time
much for
too.
being here. Jack, same thing. I know you've already left, but I value your time. I value your input. Thank you, everyone in chat who stuck it through. Thanks to everyone who just showed up, you know, for a moment. Thank you for all the recommendations, all the participation. I really, really appreciate it, guys. And I'll catch everyone in the next one, probably Sunday, but we got to figure that out for movies. And then I'll put something together with Ben and Jax in the future, and we'll figure, you know, we'll get it. We'll get there. Oh, yeah. Thanks again, everyone. And I'm going to end stream, and it's going to stay up for a little bit. And you get to look at my dumb face for a couple